After 2 decades as a software developer, Rick Hill spent 4 years with Nortel in IT, followed by 7 as a QMS and process improvement specialist, earning a Lean Six Sigma Green Belt. Subsequently, he provided contract training and auditing service to 4 global certification bodies and assisted a range of organizations with QMS implementation and training. Rick, take it away.
Thank you very much, Laura. Yes, so this is the presentation called 84 Ways to Go Beyond ISO 9001, and you're going to find out where the number 84 comes from in just a few minutes. As Laura said, I'm Rick Hill. I work for the certification body NQA, and I'm their TL 9000 program manager. And some of you may or may not have heard of TL 9000. Probably not that many of you know much about it. Part of what I want to do in this presentation is to tell you a little about TL 9000, just to give you a really quick overview of what kind of a standard it is. And then I'm going to dig into some of the specific things that TL 9000 adds to ISO 9001, which you might want to give some consideration to, because you might find them of value for your quality management system. So that's the plan. So stick with me here. So ISO 9001, all right. I'm not going to knock ISO 9001. It is a really great quality management system standard. I have no problems with it. But a couple of things. One is, here's a big quote from the introduction to the document, that it's generic, can be applied by any type of organization, no matter the type or the size, no matter the products or services it provides. So this is one of the good things about ISO 9001. It is very generic, that it is widely applicable. But by the same token, being generic limits its ability to dig down into some areas and get granular about some things. The other thing about ISO 9001 is that being produced by ISO, it's approved by consensus of, when last time I checked, and it's, this number may be different now, 162 national standards bodies, each of which gets 1 vote. So it doesn't matter how big or how small the country is, how big the quality business is there, or how small. Every country gets a 1 vote. So in a situation like this, with approval by consensus from this many people, from this many different countries, obviously there's not you're not going to find too many requirements in ISO 9001 that are really bleeding edge, that really kind of out there and challenge you. It's going to be pretty broadly accepted, right? And nothing tremendously exciting. So now consider TL 9000. So what is TL 9000? Well, it is also a quality management system standard. It's built on top of ISO 9001, and it is a sector-specific standard. So we've taken ISO 9001 and we've enhanced it to meet the supply chain quality needs of what we call the ICT sector, the Information and Communication Technology sector. We used to call TL 9000 a telecom standard, but we've kind of broadened the scope of that a little bit, because it's the lines are blurring these days, and it's not just all about telecom anymore. There are more aspects and elements and more contexts to it. So TL 9000 is it's a sector-specific standard built on ISO 9001. So similar to the aerospace standard, similar to what TS 16949 used to be. Now it's IATF 16949, and it's a separate standard from ISO, but still ISO is part of it. So same kind of deal. If you're familiar with aerospace, automotive, you'll have some idea where we're coming from with TL 9000. And it dates back to 1998. So actually, we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of the standard this year. It was created and it's maintained by a group which is called Quest Forum. Quest standing for Quality Excellence for Suppliers of Telecommunications. And that forum is a partnership of service providers, OEMs, suppliers, and as of last year, it became a part of the larger Telecommunications Industry Association. So what do we got in TL 9000? What are TL 9000's requirements? So ISO 9001 is incorporated in its entirety. When you buy that requirements handbook that you see there, you'll get the entire text of ISO 9001's requirements. And then TL 9000 specifies additional requirements, which we somewhat affectionately call adders. Also provide some TL-specific notes that follow the related ISO 9001 clauses. And some of the adders are common. They apply to all scopes. We identify those with a C for common. So no matter what kind of product you produce, what kind of service you provide, these adders are going to likely be germane to your organization. But some of the adders may apply only to hardware or to software, or to services, or to some combination of those. And so we have an H or an S or a V identifier for those to distinguish them and show that, okay, these adders are probably not going to apply to everyone. They're only going to apply to organizations that make hardware or organizations that do provide services. So, but an important point to bear in mind about TL 9000, and these different references to these different scopes give you a hint of that, is that TL 9000, in fact, is implemented by many different types of organizations, just as ISO 9001 is. Because if you look at the supply chain of organizations in the ICT sector, those include all kinds of companies providing all kinds of services, all kinds of products. So the really, TL 9000 is also widely applicable and widely applied. So here's an example of what the requirements look like in TL 9000. Here we've got the ISO 9001 clause to begin with. This is 854, preservation, fairly short and sweet. It's got a note to provide a little more information about it. And then TL 9000 adds 4 adders and a few notes to this. So here's a common adder about ESD damage, protecting items from it. This applies to everybody, potentially. Then we got an adder that's specific to hardware and software, and it's got a note of its own as well. Doesn't apply to services, though. And then we got one that applies only to hardware and services. Doesn't apply to software. And finally, we've got one that applies to software only. So if you're an organization who's implementing TL 9000 and you're looking at this requirement, you look at those, the C, the HS, the HV, the S, to guide you to which of the adders are going to be requirements that your organization needs to implement and which are ones that you won't have to because they're not relevant. Another really important thing, a very significant thing about TL 9000 is that it actually has 2 parts to it. The first part is the requirements handbook, which we've been talking about. But there's a second handbook, which is called the measurements handbook. And TL 9000, in addition to laying out ISO 9001 plus requirements for organizations that are certified to it or implement it, it also requires those organizations to submit defined monthly measurements. And the measurements handbook lays out all the requirements for that and the specific formulas and counting rules for each of those measurements. And those measurements are all very customer-specific measurements. They're measurements of things that have an impact on the customer experience that the organization provides. And this requirement for the submission of defined measurements actually makes TL 9000 unique among management system standards. There is no other standard that asks for this. So let's compare them now. So what, specifically does TL 9000, or the current 2016 version of it, what does it add to ISO 9001 2015? Well, 84 adders. That's where the number 84 comes from. If you look at those 84 adders, each of them suggests some way that you might be able to go beyond ISO 9001, and where, well, if you're certified to TL 9000, you are required to go beyond ISO 9001. There are 22 more pages of requirements on top of the pretty much 20 that are in ISO. There are 15 more requirements to maintain documented information, that is, to have a documented procedure, versus the mere 5 that the latest version of ISO calls for. There are also 16 requirements in TL 9000 to establish and implement methods. And now method is a term that has a specific definition in TL 9000. It means a method or a procedure that the organization has established, which is not necessarily documented, but it's performed consistently across the organization and it's consistently effective, and this can be demonstrated to an auditor that it is. So not quite a documented procedure, but something, approaching that, but not necessarily documented. Of course, TL 9000 adds the measurement system, which is a whole other thing beyond what ISO 9001 calls for. And then if you're looking at a third-party audit to TL 9000, it's going to take anywhere from half a day to a full 5 days longer than the corresponding ISO 9001 audit in order to cover those adders and to audit the organization's process for performing the measurements. Okay, so the question here is, what do the adders add? And this is now we're getting into the meat. This is what I really want to talk to you about today. So yes, there are some industry relevant requirements. Some of the adders do focus specifically on concerns of the supply chain for the ICT sector, but many of them are really not industry specific per se. They just constitute deeper dives into some very common quality topics, such as customer focus, supplier relationships, employee development and support, business continuity planning, quality planning, design planning and control, product test and support, and performance analysis. And the thing to note about these is that, these adders that fall under Section 2 in particular, but generally most of the 84 adders, hardly any of them is really ICT specific. In other words, they are requirements that virtually any organization could look at, could implement, could derive some benefit from. So my challenge to you today, what I want to encourage you to think about as we go through the rest of this presentation, is to think about TL 9000 adders and consider whether they can add something to your QMS. Let's take a look at them. So the first section I want to look at is customer focus. Now, if you're familiar with the quality principles that underlie ISO 9001, you'll know that the first principle is and always has been customer focus. It's like the prime directive of ISO 9001. So if we look at ISO 9001 and we look at the requirements, we would expect to find a lot of requirements that deal with customer focus, that drill down and talk specifically about what we're doing with the customer, what we're doing for the customer. So when you go through ISO 9001 and pick those out, and for the purposes of this, I'm not considering any requirement that just sort of refers in passing to customer satisfaction, but one that actually comes to grips with doing something for with the customer. This is what I came up with when I went through. Obviously, the requirement customer focus itself, customer communication. All right, determining requirements for products and services and reviewing requirements for products and services. Property belonging to customers or external providers. And customer satisfaction. And honestly, that's about it. I think if you go through ISO 9001 from end to end, there are really only those 6 requirements that specifically focus on the customer. Now let's compare with TL 9000. TL 9000 has so many requirements that focus specifically on the customer that I couldn't get them all on one slide. I had to spread them over 2 slides. I found 17 in addition to what ISO 9001 has. Let's take a look at them. Customer communications methods. This adder calls for establishing communications methods with customers, especially with key customers, jointly developing objectives and quality improvement actions to reach those objectives, particularly with key customers. Customer input. You may notice, if you've gotten familiar with your 2015 numbering, this is in the planning section. So as part of the organization's planning activities, they should be soliciting and considering input from their customers. control of customer supplied documents and data. So this is kind of a special thing. Controlling documents and data in general is, of course, a standard quality requirement, but paying particular attention to the documents and the data that you're getting from your customers, including intellectual property, proprietary data, and so forth, is requires a little special attention, and so there's a special requirement to deal with that. There's a group of adders that go together here that all relate to problem reports. Problem reports from customers, which in fact is one of the things that many of the TL9000 measurements deal with. When you receive a problem report from a customer, typically you need to classify that per severity: critical, major, minor. TL9000 has some specific guidance and rules around that. There needs to be a problem escalation mechanism, so that if customers aren't getting satisfaction, they can push the addressing of that problem up the chain. So the organization itself, if level 1 support can't handle it, then it passes it on to level 2 and on to level 3, that sort of thing. And of course, if a customer has taken the time and trouble to submit a problem report and wants something done about it, naturally you need to provide them with regular feedback so they know what the status is and they know that you haven't just ignored their issue. Product replacement. Obvious, if the customer's got an issue with a product, you need to be prepared to replace it or to make it better for them. Notification about critical problem reports, and a sort of a sister clause to that, notification about critical service disruption. What these are talking about, so the first one, critical, if you receive a problem report from a customer and it's a critical report, then you should not just address it for that customer. You should look and see whether that critical problem report is perhaps going to have an impact on some of your other customers. And if so, proactively contact those customers, let them know this issue exists, that it might cause them some pain, and take appropriate steps. The second one is for organizations which provide service to end customers. So, telecom service providers and so forth, internet service providers. If you have some kind of a critical service disruption, then you need to have some method for providing your customers with information about that, or letting them, say, go to your website and obtain information about it, or a number that they can call, or whatever it might be, so that they're not just left in the dark. The second slide, another 8, development process quality measurement. This is so for organizations that do design and development of products or services, saying you should get with your customer, you should have defined measurements, quality measurements of your development process, and if your customer's requests or is interested, you should jointly develop those with your customer and report them to your customer. You should solicit customer input to your product design and development process, to help ensure that you're providing them with what they might be looking for. When you're performing verification of your new designs, one of the things that you shouldn't neglect is to verify your user documentation, your customer documentation. Confirm that it accomplishes the goals that it was designed for, just the same as the product itself does. Release management, so to make sure that the customer has the information and the tools that they need in order to move from one release of product to another. Informing customers of design changes, particularly when there may be some contractual requirements around that. Product and service delivery, this requirement specifically is saying that when you're delivering products or delivering services to a customer, you make sure that you do so in such a way that it doesn't interfere with the customer's own day-to-day business activities. So you don't show up to provide a service when they're occupied and they can't take the time to receive you and escort you while you do that, or you don't ship a product to them so it arrives on a day when they're not ready to receive product. Emergency service provisioning, so yeah, if you're customer encounters some kind of an emergency situation with your hardware or software product, having some mechanisms in place to allow you to provide them with emergency service. Customer satisfaction data. This adder follows along to ISO 9001's customer satisfaction requirement and expands on it in a couple of ways. One is that it says that the information that you get about customer satisfaction must come from the customer himself. ISO 9001's requirement doesn't say you have to go to the customer to get the information about customer satisfaction. You can get it from distributors or dealers, or by analyzing lost business, which doesn't sound like the most effective way of finding out whether your customers are happy or not. It's a bit late by the time you're analyzing your lost business. So TL 9000 says you go right to the customer to find out whether they're satisfied or not. And when you've gotten that information from them and you've calculated your customer satisfaction numbers, you need to trend those numbers over time to see if you've got a positive or a negative trend going on. The next section I want to look at is supplier relationships. This relates to another of the quality management principles. It used to be called mutually beneficial supplier relationships. I think they've tweaked that wording a little bit now. I forget exactly what they say. But again, an area where you would expect that ISO 9001 would have quite a few requirements around. Well, okay, they got a few. 8.4 principally, of course, that whole section on externally provided processes, products, services. 853 talks about now property belonging to external providers as well as customer property. This is expanded in the 2015 version of the standard. There's a bullet under analysis and evaluation, and also a bullet or a sub-bullet under management review inputs that talks about analyzing and evaluating and reporting to management on external provider performance. Well, TL 9000 has another 4 adders that go into supplier relationships in a little more depth. Again, at the organizational planning level, you should, as well as soliciting input from customers, you should also be soliciting input from your external providers and giving consideration to it when you're doing your forward planning. Also at the design stage, get input from your external providers to help you with your design process and your design roadmap. Look at your external providers' roadmaps for their products, their components that they're providing you with, for instance, what kind of new capabilities they may have in the way of services that they could provide to you, that sort of thing. And we have a couple of adders within 8.4. One is procurement process, calls for a maintaining of documented information about working with external providers, and provides some extra details of things that need to be in there beyond what ISO calls for. And we also have an adder called external provider performance management, which provides some specific guidance about measuring external provider performance, providing the external providers with feedback on that, and so that they can, working with you, improve their performance, which helps to improve your organization's performance when your external providers can do better. Next section, I want to talk about employee development and support. TL 9000 has a raft of requirements that relate specifically to different aspects of employee training, and then a couple of more besides. First, if your organization develops internal training materials, this adder says that you need to use some kind of a appropriate controlled methodology for developing those materials to make sure that they're achieving the outcomes you want. You need to provide all of your employees who have any kind of a potential impact on quality, including top management, with training on quality and process improvement concepts, specifically on customer satisfaction, on problem solving, on continual improvement. You need to make sure that when there's new quality training available on new products, services, external providers' offerings, whatever it might be, that you provide the employees with the opportunity to take that training and communicate to them about it. Where relevant, you need to provide ESD training to your employees and define what that training consists of and how often you're going to provide refreshers. You need to make advanced quality training available as appropriate, whether it's in statistics or root cause analysis, 5S, Lean, Six Sigma, any of the above. If hazardous conditions are a factor in your workplace, then you need to provide hazardous conditions training to relevant staff. This adder defines what kinds of things need to be considered in the content of that training. If you have types of operators where they need to be qualified and requalified to perform the activity they perform, which could be things like driving forklifts, soldering, fiber optic splicing. There's a list of things where there's specific qualification requirements. Then this adder provides some information around what needs to be done about that. There's an adder that stipulates that you need to provide feedback about the organization's quality performance to your employees. In particular, you need to make sure that they're aware of how you're doing as far as customer satisfaction goes. You should be sharing the outcomes, the results of management reviews with them, as long as there's nothing too secret in there, financial details, for instance, that can't be publicly revealed. But don't take the mushroom approach to your employees. Keep them current on how the organization's doing. Are customers happy? Are we hitting our targets, etc.? And finally, you need to have some kind of methods in place to help to make sure that employees really do participate actively in your quality improvement activities. Next, I want to take a look at quality planning. A number of interesting adders here. The organization should be looking at specific long-term quality planning and short-term quality planning. Whatever those different horizons mean to your organization, TL 9000 doesn't stipulate or specify there, but make a set objectives and plans to reach those objectives for the short term and for the long term. Business continuity planning. This is such a huge hole in ISO 9001. Every organization needs to have business continuity planning, and ISO 9001 does not have a requirement about that unless you really read deeply between the lines. But TL 9000 is quite clear about this, that you need to have a business continuity plan in place that looks at disaster recovery, at security restoration, and at how you're going to continue to provide products and services to your customers in the event of a whatever it might be. And there are many different kinds of scenarios that could have an impact on an organization's ability to continue to provide products and services. You need to have a plan for that, and you need to review that plan regularly. You need to have a life cycle model in place for your products and services, so that the development, the introduction, the retirement, and so on of products and services is being done in a controlled manner. You need to pay special attention to product and service security. Now, this is particularly relevant in the ICT industry, when we look at telecommunications networks, when we look at information security and so on. This is a big topic and kind of relates to ISO 27001, the information security standard. But this adder's just saying that organizations do need to consider security in the context of their products and their services. As part of your life cycle model, you need to specifically have end-of-life planning. And when you're taking a product or a service to end of life, there are a lot of specific things that you need to keep in mind. This adder, like many of the TL 9000 adders, is quite detailed and lays out a whole laundry list of things that should have consideration given to them. And then tools management. If there are tools that the organization develops internally to do what it does, obviously the development and the maintenance of those tools needs to be done in a managed and controlled manner. Next, I want to go specifically into the area of design planning and control. So on the planning side, you need to have a project plan for a design project. And this is one of those clauses that has a very long laundry list of things that need to be considered and which should be present in a good project plan. And if you wonder, am I using the word should? Should is another term in the TL 9000 standard that has a special definition. If, for instance, this adder says that your project plan for design and development should include the following, and when it says should, it means the project plan will include the following. But if there's any of these things that you're not going to include, then you need to have a good rationale for why you don't, and you need to ensure that you're still meeting the intent nevertheless. There needs to be risk management planning as part of overall design planning. TL 9000 was one of the sector-specific standards that was considerably ahead of the curve on ISO 9001 on this. The pre-2015 revisions of ISO 9001 didn't even mention the word risk in any of their requirements, but TL 9000 has had this adder in there for some time. Product testing needs to be planned out specifically, and there's a list of things to consider in that. Product and system integration, ditto. Configuration management for hardware and services need to have a plan for how you're going to place your hardware and service or software artifacts under configuration management and control those things. Product computing resources. If you're developing some kind of a product, whether it's hardware or software, that's going to run on a hardware platform of some sort, whether it's something that you're going to provide to the customer, or whether you're, say, just providing a software release to the customer and they're expected to provide the servers, the blades for it to run on, you need to consider what the resource requirements are going to need to be for that target computing platform that this needs to run on or run with, so that you're not sending a customer, say, a new software release which they're not going to be able to run on the servers that they have and they weren't forewarned. And of course, migration planning as well. And this is to help out the customer. So when you introduce a new release of your hardware or software product, you need to make sure you've provided the customer with what they need in order to be able to seamlessly migrate from the old release to the new release, to go back down to the old release if necessary, and so on. I like this picture of these people designing here. It reminds me of junior high. You got all the boys sitting on one side of the room and the girls on the other, and that isn't that always the way. And then on the design control side, requirements traceability. You need to be able to have traceability of your requirements all the way through from the original customer or product management market requirements through design to test, so that you have confidence that all of the original requirements have been implemented in the product and they've been tested and they work. The tests have passed, so we know we haven't omitted anything. I think I mentioned this one before, that you need to have some kind of quality measurements for your development process, which may be jointly developed and shared with customers where appropriate. I also mentioned release management before. Obviously, the release of new product needs to be a managed process. But as well, of course, we have to have a change management process. Change is the bane of design projects, and it's ever so important that it's well managed. This adder lays out some of the requirements around that. Problem resolution configuration management. So this is talking about if we have problems with the product and we capture those products, we address them, we fix a hardware problem, we deliver a software patch, we go out and make right something that wasn't exactly right with a service we provided, that somehow those changes that we've made to our product or service design get captured. They go into a configuration control of some sort, so that when we're developing or delivering or manufacturing those products later, delivering those services later, we capture those issues and do it right the next time, that we don't repeat the same problem over again. And finally, component changes. On the hardware side, obviously, a component change is always something that needs to be carefully controlled. And again, this adder lays out some of the considerations and requirements around that. Next area, following on from design, I guess, is product test, product support. So on the product test side, as part of the verification activities, you need to do stress testing to make sure that the product, really meets any potential requirements that it might hit out there, which could have to do with temperature, heat, cold, temperature cycling. On the software side, whether it's overload, heavy demands on the product. Also, abnormal conditions testing. So, what happens if dumb user enters incorrect data or out of range data, or figures out a new thing that he thinks the product ought to do and tries to get it to do that? What happens? System testing. Every hardware or software system, after it's been designed, developed, integrated, a system test needs to be performed to make sure that that entire integrated product system works properly. These three hardware adders go together: periodic retesting, content of testing, frequency of testing. Periodic retesting is saying that after you've gotten into the manufacturing phase and you're just shooting these hardware products out into the field, that you need periodically to do a more significant retesting of that product. So not just routine checks that you're doing at the end of the assembly line before it goes in a box and it goes out to a customer, but a more in-depth test, something perhaps recapitulating some of the testing that you did when you were designing the product or when you were verifying the product, so you have ongoing confidence that that product still continues to meet all the requirements, that there hasn't been some kind of a drift in its performance because of changes in the way people are doing things on the line, or because an external provider has changed a component on you and neglected to mention it to you, or something of that sort. A content of testing that talks about what is going to be the content of that periodic retesting, as well as what is the content of your other final testing you're performing on the product. And then the frequency of testing is what it is. How frequently you're going to perform periodic retesting and other types of testing. If your organization accepts product back from the customer to repair and return to the customer, then before you return that product, that repaired product, you need to test it to the same extent that you would have done, newly manufactured product. So you put it through the same testing protocol as you would new product, to have confidence that it's going to meet its requirements to satisfy the customer. You need to have well-defined inspection and test documentation, and documentation retained from those activities for your hardware products or for your services activities. These two clauses, again, define specific things that need to be documented in the requirements for the test and in the records of the testing. And then on the software side, there's also a test documentation adder, which lays out some slightly different requirements, more specific to the software type of product. And then on the product support side, you need to provide installation instructions to the customer or the distributor, the installer, for obvious reasons. Operational changes. This is an interesting one. If anything changes in the way that operations are performed to produce a hardware product or to deliver a service, whether it is a new operator or associate performing the work, whether it's a new piece of equipment, a new machine, a new tool, whether it's a new procedure or a new way of performing an activity on the production floor, anything like that. When you make a change like that, then you need to do a focused special inspection of your, a first article inspection of this first item off the line or the first services that you deliver after that change has been made, to make sure that your product, your service is still meeting requirements in just the same way. If you use software in service delivery, then you need to make sure that that software is appropriately controlled, that you've got configuration management and protection from viruses and those sorts of things in place. Similarly, if there are mechanical tools that you use in delivering a service, you need to control those, and if changes need to be made, that those are done in a controlled manner, and you make sure that the service you're delivering is still good. On the hardware side, you need to have traceability for recall, where product recall is a possibility, is a potential scenario, so that you can perform a recall if you need to. You also need to have traceability of design changes, so that if a customer reports an issue, you need to go back and figure out where that issue got introduced. You have a history of your design changes, so that you can go back and, based on the the date code or the serial number or whatever it may be of the customer product, you can find out what the story is. For both hardware and software, you need to have appropriate product identification in place, of course. And for software, if you're going to issue fixes by means of patches, then this adder provides information about what needs to be included in those patch packages, including what kinds of information needs to be made available to the user who needs to install that patch. Finally, I want to look at performance analysis. TL9000 adds a few requirements here to what ISO 9001 has already got in place. One is saying that you need to do trend analysis of non-conforming product or non-conforming service, so that, again, you've got a good handle on whether things are getting better or things are not getting better. And you've got the information you need to take appropriate action based on the type of issues you're seeing. You also need to analyze field performance data, whether it's on a hardware or a software product, or on services that, after you've delivered them out in the field. You need to analyze that performance specifically. And then, of course, another element of performance analysis in TL9000 is the TL9000 measurements, which are really all about performance analysis. As I mentioned, with a specific focus on the kinds of performance issues that customers are going to notice, and that's customers are going to be hurting from if there are issues with that performance. So having run through those, I don't think I touched on all 84 adders, but I picked out some of the highlights in some key areas. So now, having had a look at those, I want to ask you again to think for yourself. Think of your organization, think of your management system, and ask, how can you use the adders to improve your quality management system? Are there some things in there that you could usefully implement to beef up what you've got? How could you use the adders to perform more value-added internal audits? If you're going out and performing an internal audit, some of these adders suggest some of the things, above and beyond the generic things that ISO 9001 calls out specifically, some other specific details that it might be value-added for you to look at and to ask about when you're performing your internal audits. And bottom line, how can you use the adders to strengthen your business? I think they provide you with some opportunities, and I would encourage you to have a look at them. If you want to find out some more about TL9000, you can simply go to tl9000.org, tl9000.org, and there's lots of information there about the standard. And of course, I would welcome contact from any of you listening to this presentation if you have questions about TL9000, about any of its requirements, or about what NQA can provide in the way of certification to that standard or to other standards. You can just contact me at rhill at nqa.com. And with that, I will turn it back over to Laura.
Thanks, Rick. This ends today's presentation. Thanks for watching. Bye.